On today's show, we visit iRacing for their first open house, including an interview with Dave about the new upcoming tire model.
This show is sponsored by Sim Raceway. Welcome to Inside Sim Racing, episode number 87. I'm Jessica Lopez and Darren Ganji right here.
Hey everybody.
And he's actually driving one of the two cars that was released by iRacing today. One of them is the Williams FW31, which is probably the most anticipated car in their fleet of vehicles.
Definitely.
And the Mazda MX-5, which Darren is driving here. Speaking of iRacing, Shaun got to try both of these two newly released cars way before they were released, well, a couple weeks back.
Along with all the other people at that open house?
Yep, he was at iRacing's open house in Boston a couple weeks ago. We mentioned it on the episode where I interviewed Dale, and he got to meet a ton of local sim racers and got to tour iRacing's facilities, which was his second time there. And he put together a little piece, and here it is.
Get ready for some off-road action with the all-new Mini RC Buggy from World Tech Toys. Featuring working front and rear suspension, you can conquer any type of terrain. With working headlights, not even the darkness can stop you. Race up to 4 at a time and see who the real off-road king is. Order now and you'll get the Mini RC Buggy, rapid charge controller, and 4 cones. Here's how you can order.
Call 1-866-688-7990. Mini RC Buggies are $19.99 plus shipping and handling. You must be 18 years or older to order. Get it online at minircbuggy.com.
iRacing recently made a post in their forum inviting iRacers to their first open house. This invite list quickly filled up, and I was lucky enough to be one of the guests in attendance. iRacing had staff awaiting in the lobby to greet the guests as they came in the door. At this point, all were given a name tag, an iRacing t-shirt, and some other swag to enjoy. After a few handshakes, it didn't take long for each guest to make their way out of the lobby and in search of the racing rigs. The first stop for most was the iRacing Driver Development Lab, where you would find 4 fully built sim rigs running the sim. The rigs would be running both the Mazda MX-5 as well as the new Williams F1 car. These cars had yet to be released, and it was a real pleasure for all to be able to try them out before the rest of the world. In another room, there were 3 sim rigs set up and running, and over in this area you would find even more iRacers talking sim racing and waiting their turns to try out the new cars. While waiting their turns to drive, iRacers were also meeting each other for the first time in person, many of them knowing each other online for much time prior to this event. This is one of the moments that makes these gatherings so special. Now, despite the iRacing employees being out in the crowd and available for about any direct questions they were asked, they also had several employees taking different groups on a tour of the offices with stops along the way to learn from some of the masterminds at iRacing. Ian Berwick is one of the lead designers who focuses on car building. He was the first stop on the tour for our group, and he went on to explain in great detail some of the processes used at iRacing for building a car.
The process kind of starts so we'll sign the contract, and generally we're signing a contract with people that have absolutely nothing to do with the car. So then it's the process of trying to figure out, okay, who are the people that actually have the data for the car? And then once we figure that part out, then we send Ian and Eric, generally, one or both of them, will go actually make a site visit to the car and then take it from there.
Generally, we'll measure the chassis, we'll complete the car if we can. Actually, I have some pictures of cars that I worked on in the past. Try to get it, if we can get a raw frame, we'll measure all the chassis picket points from that point, and then we'll draw up all the geometry, atoms, fill atoms in a suspension geometry program. It's pretty effective, based off of that, to get all of our roll centers and ride heights and all that stuff. And from there we start translating all that into code.
He would then go on to describe how they measured tires and wheels for each car, and how different combinations will react differently within the sim. He also talked about engines and how they obtain their data, and their power bands. Then he explained the aerodynamic work that goes into each car, as well as the relation of the parts on the car, and how setup changes will affect even the aero balance of the cars. Also covered was the data curves for various different parts on the car, and ultimately the controlling factors within iRacing. When it comes to making cars, Ian is the link between reality and what becomes the virtual, As our tour progressed, the next person would need no introduction to most at the party, and that would be Dave Kemmer, the man behind the sim. Dave would go on to tell the group about his new tire model that he has been working on for quite some time, explaining to people where we were coming from with the old tire models and what we could expect from the new tire model, likely to be in the next build.
You know, there's sort of a big dearth of information about racing and you know, how tires make grip on a racetrack. And so I've been really kind of going back to first principles and saying, okay, well, let's see if let's figure out how to model the tire in a way that lets us work from just some basic measurements that we can do. We don't have to put it on a tire tester. And I've been having good success by just, you know, chipping things off one at a time. I mean, the first thing is to think about, like, how does you know, you're going to have some patch of rubber in contact with the road, and the question is, what's that patch of rubber doing and how is it creating grip? That's only step one. It's like, okay, so we get this patch of rubber on the ground. Second is, well, what does that patch look like? How big is it? Where is it? How does it distort as you know, climb a curb or, you know, whatever? And so you have to start looking at the tire carcass. You know, people talk a lot about coefficient of friction because that's what we learn in high school physics, and that's kind of the model for, you know, how are friction forces generated from sliding. And it turns out that with tire rubber, it's kind of a useless concept because there is no such thing. It's moving all the time. So it doesn't, and it, you know, you can't say that this section of road has this coefficient of friction and this section of road has this coefficient of friction. They're going to probably boot me out of here if I don't have it done, not for this season, but the following season. I've got to at least get it on some of the cars. So that's the current plan.
The final stop on the tour would be with Greg Hill to talk about track building. So I'm here at iRacing with Greg Hill, who a year ago we met with Greg, and he gave us some of the most technical information we've ever had on the show, and it was insightful. So, Greg, nice seeing you again.
Thanks for making the trip out.
Thank you. Today you have something I think is even more spectacular, is probably the wording. A lot of lighting changes, a lot of new things graphically coming for iRacing.
Right, well, I'm going to show you guys just a glimpse of what's to come. We're finally at a point in our development of iRacing where we've really started to focus on graphics, and we've freed up an engineer to essentially devote all of his time to improving the graphics.
Okay.
And we're going to start to see some of those improvements actually in this coming build.
The very next build.
The very next build, so
okay.
End of October, essentially.
Excellent.
So here we have Dover, a track that was just recently released, but there's one thing in particular that's going to be dramatically different, and you'll see it as I move forward here. And people might have never noticed that it was missing in the past, but you can start to see here we have some fence shadows starting to creep in, and that's actually something we haven't had before. So we waited because we wanted to find a way to do it that was efficient and fast, because these things are casting across, in some circumstances, almost the whole track. So it needs to be done efficiently so that different machines can run with acceptable frame rates. So we're using a method called shadow maps. So it's essentially rendering the shadow into a texture and casting it over the track. And it's very, very efficient. People can enable it and expect to see almost no difference in their frame rate.
So even though people are accustomed to like turning off shadows as a frame rate saver, this really won't make a difference at all.
Yeah, and also we're going to use the same method with tree shadows. So people have noted at maybe a track like Road America, going down the straight that has the trees on both sides with the tree shadows. People have had to turn those off,
right?
Because the frame rate's been really poor. But with this new technique, it's essentially the same technique as the fences. It's almost free.
Wow! And that will the tree part be in the next build as well, or is that something coming later?
The tree part will be in the next build.
So people right now will probably be able to start changing their graphic settings if they turn that off to save things.
Yes.
Okay. When you're in the car, will you see these shadows in the car, or is this purely on the track?
There'll be a setting, so you can choose to have it cast onto the track, you can choose to have it off, or you can have it cast on everything, including the car.
Wow. And I see a lot of other shadows, it seems, or maybe more depth than I'm accustomed to. Am I seeing something else, or?
Yeah, another step we've taken, and it's kind of the first step in many in adjusting the lighting and the overall look of the product is we've adjusted the illumination levels. We had one of our engineers go out into the field with a lux meter, and he scientifically measured the lighting levels for different materials, asphalts, grasses, what the lighting level should be in shadow. And it's more of a scientific way we're doing the lighting now versus a subjective.
A minute ago you were showing me some other type of texture differences, or lighting differences, I bet is a better wording.
Yeah, there's a number of things I can show you at Daytona that we've implemented. So here's Daytona here. I'm up in the stands, and you might not notice it, but in the past, when you were watching a race from the spectator areas, you might not have seen people from the backs. So
right.
We've actually added the backs of people, and for performance reasons, people can turn off the crowds altogether if they want. They can have it so just the backs will only show up in replay, so it's balanced for performance in that way as well. Okay. And as I fly over here to Lake Lloyd, you can see that we've really improved the way that the water renders.
Yes, it's like glowing almost, or sparkling.
Yeah, so it's a small little feature, but it can really improve the look at tracks like this in Phillip Island.
Well, that's a huge improvement that's noticeable immediately. I mean, when you look for it, it may be a little more subtle, but that's the kind of stuff that really makes up the whole picture. All right, now I need to see some, maybe this is selfish reasons. Everyone in the office seems to be running Spa today, but I understand Spa is still coming along and a work in progress, but it's sort of pushing you guys to a new level, isn't it?
We've made a lot of progress with Spa in the last weeks, especially this week where we finally have it fully drivable. We have a number of the objects in there, and we're starting to go in and make the track textures for it. The way that we're doing the textures for Spa, I touched a bit earlier on kind of the improved lighting levels. Well, with Spa, we're going to start with a new way to create the textures for our tracks. We're going to actually be calibrating the textures. So when we're in the field collecting the reference, we're going to be using photographic gray cards. So what these will allow us to do, you can see this little card right here. If we're photographing a curb when it's cloudy or when it's sunny, we'll have this common gray card that is at a lighting level and that we know, so that we can kind of calibrate the reference
right.
from one track at different times of day or different tracks, so that everything is consistently lit and accurate, so that you don't see grasses that don't look like they could realistically exist.
Right.
Which we've kind of gotten better at over the years, but this will really help us hone in on really accurate textures.
So that gray color, that card becomes sort of the common denominator, the 0 point? Is that the way that works?
Essentially, yes.
Huh. And so Spa will be the first track that really features this.
Right. So this, combined with the overall improvement in light levels, will really, the scene will just look much more lifelike, much more believable.
Wow. So do you think that people will have a hard time after they've seen this looking at some of the other tracks that they've been on before? I mean, it's going to be very dynamic, I think.
Yeah, well, the illumination level fix will be at all tracks. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to start to go back to older tracks bit by bit and update their textures to this new method as best we can. But going forward, all the new tracks will be developed in this way.
So a lot of work being given to the graphical details and lighting and more in particular.
Yeah, so this is just the start. I mean, we're going to start, we're looking already into high dynamic range for the skies, bloom effects, depth of field effects. So there's a lot coming, and we're gonna keep on working on improving it.
And like you said, your emphasis is always going to be on frame rates and performance, though. You're not just throwing more and more in it and making it so I need a new computer, but keeping it at a level so if I'm running today, I'm running tomorrow as well.
Right. It's important to strike a balance, and as we add things, if they're kind of high-end features, make sure that they're toggleable or.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, thank you very much once again. You are the guy with all the fun tricks and stuff.
Well, I'm happy to share it. So.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Listening to Ian, Dave, and Greg was captivating for most, and perhaps over the heads of many of us non-engineer types.
but to hear the passion and to see the amount of work that goes into the sim made us all appreciate our hobby and sport that much more. And therefore, it would be back to the sim rigs for most of us to get our last chance to drive these new cars before the public does. The day would finish with iRacing thanking all for coming and having a little giveaway with a few lucky iRacers getting wheels, iRacing banners, and other cool prizes. But the biggest prize of all was getting to meet the guys we race against each night. I've been able to meet many sim racers over the years, and it has turned into some of the best relationships I have in life. In fact, Inside Sim Racing was started by two sim racers meeting in person and becoming friends. Who knows what relationships were made that day and what it will lead to in the future.
GamePod, the ultimate race rig for those serious about sim racing. Puts you in the driver's seat with all the controls at your fingertips. Be number one on the road, in the race, in the game. GamePod, the choice of champions.
rFactor Central, the home of the one-click install. Go to rFactor Central now and download the new client for the fastest downloads and one-click install your favorite rFactor mod. No more mass errors, no more viruses. Automatically download and install hundreds of cars and tracks and never have to manage a file to do it. Seeing is believing. Go to rFactorCentral.com, download the new client, and try out the free trial membership for yourself.
Back here with Shaun. Welcome to the set.
Thank you.
I have to say I've been enjoying your footage and pieces that you put together on iRacing and their open house.
I, once again, might have been a little over-enthusiastic, but got the job done. Had a blast. It was so great. I can't reiterate how great it is meeting people that you've known online. It changes online racing forever. And I got to tell you one more thing. The number one question asked of me, where's Jessica? So it's a shame that you weren't able to make the open house.
I know,
as well.
I really wanted to attend, and hopefully next time I will get the opportunity to meet all of the sim racers that are local to iRacing out there in Boston.
Right.
And while you were out there, you actually got to try their new tire model, didn't you?
Yeah, a lot of people got to kind of see it. I got to drive it, which was a huge privilege. It was strange circumstances. I mean, I was kind of sitting this way and the screen was that way, and there were no tire sounds in the game, which made it hard to really get a feel for it, but there were some distinct new qualities about it.
And in the past, you've mentioned that you really like the Netcar Pro tire model. How would you say that iRacing's new model compares to that of Netcar?
It's still too soon to really compare them, but I can tell you that Netcar has always had great wheel to road to tire feel, and iRacing has made a huge leap forward, and I can't wait to feel the finished version.
All right, well, you sat down with Dave Kemmer, the one responsible for building this new tire model, and got an interview with him.
Yeah, a little bit to talk about with him about the tire and the future.
All right, well, we're going to take a look at Shaun with Dave Kemmer, and this segment is sponsored by Racing Central, home of sim racing news and forums since the year 2000.
Well, about a year ago, Darren and Dave had a very long discussion about tires, and that wasn't even the beginning of your tire days, but that was sort of our first look at the new tire model that we've heard about, we know is coming, and I understand it's getting very, very close now.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping that we can get it out in another season. I've gotten so that I'm driving on it now. There's still a lot of details to work out, but it's looking pretty good, feeling pretty good. So I've got my fingers crossed.
In real racing, they say tires are the most important thing in racing. I would think that a big tire change in a sim is probably the most important change we'd feel in a sim.
Well, it is. It's, for sure, the tires probably affect the way the car behaves more than anything else. And it's certainly the most complicated thing to model. With tires, in a sense, it's almost like an entire system in and of itself that has to be simulated piece by piece to come up with the sum of the parts.
Okay, yeah, I can see. And that's, again, why they're so complex in real life as well.
Right.
When I think of physics, and we've talked about degrees of freedom, like and how many things are being measured in a sim, does a tire have more than one degree of freedom in it? I mean, is a sim a whole model of its own? I mean, it seems like it's that complex to me.
Well, in essence, it kind of does. For one thing, the wheel is treated in 3D space, so we start with, okay, where's the rim located, and of course it has a 3D position and an orientation, you know, how it's tipped over, although because the tire's symmetrical, the thing that really changes is only, you know, essentially its camber and how it's steering with respect to where it's going. So that we model, but then in the tire model itself, you have the tire carcass, which actually moves with respect to the rim. So the carcass has more degrees of freedom, and you know, the new model basically takes that up to essentially 6 degrees of freedom of the carcass. So it can, you know, it moves around relative to the wheel rim, and it tilts and steers relative to the wheel rim.
Okay. So they are very complex for something that a lot of people just think of as turning around. As a sim racer, what am I going to notice first or most about a new tire build?
Well, my hope is that it's kind of subtle in a way. I mean, when you're just doing the normal things, but there are a lot of sort of shortcomings of our current tire model having to do with how temperature builds, the way that the grip changes with speed and with load and things like that, that, you know, they're just not quite right, and we work very hard to kind of tune the numbers into a place where it feels right. With this model, from what I've seen, there are a lot of things that just kind of fall out of it naturally. Like it's pretty easy to do burnouts, for example. You know, which with the older tire model, it can be tricky to do that, and it doesn't feel quite exactly the same as when you're in a real car. On the slick tires, racing slicks, it definitely feels a little more knife edge when you lose control. But, you know, they're definitely catchable. But the one thing that you'll notice is that it feels a lot more planted on the road. And that's one thing that people have always talked about. You know, it's kind of, you know, sometimes the tires feel like you're just kind of floating there.
Like you're on ice almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you can really feel the tire working on the road. It's hard to explain. You just have to try it out.
And what about, okay, so when NASCAR, for example, makes a big tire change, the crew chiefs pretty much have to take their rule book or their notes from the last race and throw them out the window. Am I going to be able to use my setups, or is it going to really change things?
You know, even when they make a tire change, they're not going to change it a huge amount. Although this tire change for us is bigger than anything you'd ever see in the real world, because we're changing the model. So I would say that when we first come out with it, chances are there are going to need to be some setup changes. You know, hopefully we'll do a lot of that work and come up with some good default setups that work pretty well.
Sure.
But for sure, I mean, people who've spent a lot of time putting setups together are going to need to go in and tweak those.
Right.
Hopefully it's not going to, you know, be drastic.
Right. And you had talked about temperature buildup in the tires, getting back to setups even. Do you think that there'll be a little bit more realism in the setup change? So when I make setup change, will that be noticeable in the tires like that?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've been doing with the drivable version that I have so far, I have been noticing that the setup changes do seem to do more. Interestingly, in real life, cars are it's tough to get the sweet spot where it's really well balanced. You know, they'll tend to just push a lot, or they'll be really loose.
Right.
And the place in between where it's really good is kind of small. And that's, you know, how it is, like it or not. But you know, I think again we'll build some setups, and there shouldn't be you know, a huge amount of work for people.
What about force feedback? I mean, tires again are so important. Do you have to do anything for force feedback as a new tires, or is it natural?
I mean, part of the forces that a tire generates are what are called moments. They're basically the twisting forces. I mean, both in terms of how it steers the tire. There are, but we talk about, you know, some of that comes back through the steering wheel and you feel, but some of those moments will actually steer the tread on the wheel rim. And those things have an effect, you know. And, you know, if you have the camber set up a particular way, for example, and you get on the gas, you're going to get that, it might steer the tread one way or steer the tread another way, and that's going to affect the way it feels.
Right.
And I mean, all those things are pretty subtle, but those kind of things we haven't really modeled before. And, you know, they're pretty important because, you know, you're talking about a difference of 50 or 60 pounds of force.
Right.
It can make a big difference in how it handles.
So I know a lot of things in sim racing, a lot of things in life are a yin and yang. So as the tire comes along, do you find other parts of the physics engine that need to be worked on in order to adapt to the tire, or does all of a sudden aero change because of the tires? I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, to me it's like the whole simulation is like the guy with the spinning plates. And this new tire model, I'm spinning that plate so freaking fast, it's never going to come down, and it leaves me to go and like adjust some of the other ones.
Right.
You know, there are plenty of things in the model that we'd like to improve, and we keep doing it. You know, we did the new transmission model, which is, I think, really awesome.
I love it.
You know, we're doing a lot of work also with aero, trying to improve our methodology for getting good aero numbers. You know, there's all kinds of stuff to do. We need to, I think, work more on the engine and drivetrain. I mean, the gearbox we've got, but the sort of engine friction, drivetrain friction, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Brake temperatures.
Sure.
You know, all kinds of stuff like that. You know, we just keep chipping away.
Right. Right.
But it seemed like, okay, the tires are kind of the foundation.
Yeah.
If we don't have those right, then all the work we do on everything else, you can't really see.
Yeah, it's sort of the first and last point, I think, of it, is the sim. As a guy, you know, lifelong game builder, sim builder, how does it feel being on something that continually evolves instead of one of those packaged up, put in a box? I mean, is that real satisfying for you, being able to really, like, grow it?
Yeah. You know, it's not quite the same. You don't get that same, oh, geez, I hope everybody likes it when it's, you know, shipped out. And you know, you're praying that there be no bugs. But it's very cool, actually, because we get a lot of pretty quick feedback. You know, on sort of the 3-month cycle that we've been working on. Every time we release a new build, it's cool to see, you know, how people react to it.
Right.
You know, it's also exciting to see the growth. You know, people signing up and trying it out, and you know, it's always changing. You know, who's in the forum? What are people talking about?
Right.
So it's cool.
Very nice. Well, I'm fascinated by what you do. I think it's the most important thing in sim racing, and it's just continually getting better. So thank you for your time. Thanks for the insight, and I think we'll come back in a year and see what you've got for us next time.
Okay. Hopefully I won't still be working on this tire model.
Well, I'm hoping we'll be driving it, you'll be on to something else.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Inside Sim Racing. Shaun and I are leaving in a couple days to SEMA in Las Vegas, where
Vegas, baby.
we hope to get an interview with Kazunori regarding GT5, and everyone keep your fingers crossed for us out there.
That should be very cool. A lot of cool things at SEMA.
We'd love to bring that to you guys, and you know, we've been told we're going to get an interview, but we just don't know.
Working our way up to the actual interview, not just a photo interview.
Keep your fingers crossed for us. We're hoping to get that interview with Kaz. Stay tuned to find out, and we'll be bringing you our SEMA coverage on our next episode of Inside Sim Racing.
From Vegas.
From Vegas. Until then, the checker flag is out.
And so are we.
And so are we. Racing rigs provided by GamePod, the choice of champions. Go to gamepod.co.uk.
Right. Right. Wow. Okay. Okay.
Things like that.
Right. Right. Sure. Right.